Unashamed Unafraid, a show unashamed about sexual addiction recovery and unafraid of coming unto Christ for healing, where we share real recovery stories, learn from experts, and share resources that actually work. So join us in being unashamed and unafraid.
Welcome to Unashamed Unafraid. Don't forget to give us a 5-star review so we can spread this message to more people. Follow us on the social media at Unashamed Unafraid. And hop on our website, unashamedunafraid.com, and become an outsider. I'm here with my guy, James. James, how you doing, man?
Good. How are you doing, man?
I'm good.
Glad to be here.
Heidi, how are you doing? We have our friend Heidi Hastings on here with us. A researcher.
I'm doing so great.
You're a researcher introduce yourself. Paint yourself into context for us.
I'm a marriage and sex researcher, PhD, and I am a disciple of Christ.
That's a good introduction. I like that.
With emphasis in my research on religious women and sexual betrayal.
Wow.
Okay.
So tell us more about that. Just kind of from a general standpoint, your research and the projects that you've done. You've mentioned to me before your dissertation that you did. We're interested in hearing about that.
Okay, great. So I started out doing research on religious women after writing a few papers in my doctoral program at the intersection of religion and media, which led me to look at pornography. And I'd read probably hundreds of articles on pornography, and I started to think, what's going on with their wives? They're talking about things like if there is a religious wife or a highly religious wife, the impacts on the men when they're viewing pornography are worse. And reading research showing that about 90% of men have a history with pornography, and about 65%, it really depends on the study. It varies, but are actively viewing pornography. And it came to my heart, what is going on with their wives? So did a first study with just Christian women, and I was looking at how it impacts their sexuality. And then I did a second study and added on some Jewish women, and I was looking at how it impacts the women's sexuality how it impacts their religiosity and their spirituality when they have a husband who has been involved with pornography. And I was looking specifically at pornography, but more than half of the women, without me asking any questions, also brought up that there had been other kinds of sexual betrayal. And then I had a professor approach me and say, maybe we need to look at doing this for your dissertation as well. And I was then adding on people of different races, making sure I had ages from 20s to 70s, and added on, again, some more participants of all those religions that I just mentioned, as well as a Muslim woman. So,
wow.
Okay.
And for that dissertation project, I was looking at what is the process they go through from beginning to end. If we can explain that from a research perspective, that's going to be very helpful for women. But I did it through the lenses of identity development theories, which then helped us see how is their identity changing over time throughout this process.
So Heidi, how would you define, just so we're clear on what we're talking about, how would you define betrayal, and how would you define betrayal trauma?
So for me, I let the women define that themselves. I did not define it for them, although when we're writing about it and when we're looking up research, it's that they feel deep traumatic responses when coming face to face with the realization that their belief that their marriage had been protected from this happening, generally speaking, there are a few exceptions to that, but or that it wouldn't be serious, to then realizing this is a massive problem. And in most of the cases, it was kept secret. And so there was a major disclosure or discovery that their whole world just crumbled at that point in time.
Wow. So what were the themes that you, as these women talked with you, what did you see as some consistent things that you were hearing from them that they were experiencing as they went through this as religious women?
It's a really great question, and it was different than what I thought.
Why was it different?
When I started out, some of the questions I asked were, what's your opinion of pornography? Did you come with preconceived ideas about that? And how was it spoken about in your home or in your religion as you were growing up? And some of the questions were about their emotional responses, about physical responses, about and all of that was interesting. But when it came to what have you learned and how have you changed, all of a sudden that opened up a whole different level of understanding about this. So I'll get into that a little bit as I talk about the actually a model emerged from this that showed there were 5 distinct stages. And I will say, as I started analyzing the interviews, initially there were 3. And the 3 words that came to my mind, of course, I was very prayerful during this whole process. The 3 words that came to mind when I started analyzing all the interviews was creation, fall, atonement. Meaning for those who are Christian, that there's a creation of this woman with very innocent beliefs, with innocent understanding of what marriage would be like, innocent understanding of perhaps what pornography is like, and what her husband is going to be like. And then the fall happens through experiencing the discovery or the disclosure. And then there's healing that comes through Jesus Christ or God for those who aren't believers in Jesus Christ. Then as I fleshed it out a little bit, the stages became first innocence, like I talked about, which is similar to creation. Crisis, that's that period of time shortly, a little bit prior to and could be for decades after learning of the betrayal. Aftermath, healing and transformation. And I can tell you a little about some of those if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say I would be interested in hearing kind of all of those stages. As you talked about identity development, right? This is what kind of you'd base that on. Like, did you also develop or dive into, I should say, how they're perceived, what their identity was perceived prior to that betrayal as well? So I'm imagining you kind of went from like, who did you see yourself as? Then how did that impact how you saw yourself? And then how do you see yourself now? Is that kind of like,
absolutely,
is that kind of that identity movement? Is that, I'm kind of imagining that's what that looked like. Is that accurate?
Right. So when you look at those early stages that they were talking about having incomplete messages about their role as women, specifically. A lot of them, that their role was to support and serve the head of the household, who was the man. Their role was more subservient in a lot of the religions, and secondary for sure. They had innocent and incomplete ideas about their sexual identity. All they knew is that sex often was talked about in a way that was very negative. And then when you're married, you're supposed to just please your husband, and it was supposed to be fantastic, which they said it wasn't a lot of times. There were parts of their religious identity that they spoke about as being very naive. They took little things that were said and tried to build understanding around it, but they were truly naive. They would say they were naive and didn't really put all the pieces together, which in the long run made them very vulnerable.
Okay, so the personal question here. I have got 3 unmarried daughters, 17 to 22.
Okay.
Based off of that research, like that you're talking about, what can I do as a parent to talk to and help my girls develop or walk into relationship with more wisdom?
I love that question.
You know where I'm headed with that. So yeah. So tell me.
That's so great. I think as parents, we take our role as teachers very seriously, right?
Absolutely.
But sometimes that means that we tell them everything to do, and there's not really a lot of room for exploration of their own ideas, of using their own power or agency, however you want to call that. And so one thing that emerged for me is the importance of helping our children, especially our daughters, use their agency, know what it's like to be a powerful woman who should be on equal standing with men.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean they're above. It doesn't mean they're below. It means they're side by side, and that their ideas matter. They don't need to suppress their voices when they are, in the presence of somebody who seems to have more power. For me, with my daughters, I try to talk a lot about power, and there's power over, and there's power with.
Right.
And when it's power with, then there's power to. You have power to do things together. So really teaching them how to use their agency, how to understand what their desires are religiously or even to career-wise, and helping them just explore and understand more fully who they are, what their ideas are, what their opinions are about things.
Okay. Can I deepen this then? I know my 3 daughters. All 3 of them, I think, would have a tendency to have power over.
Okay.
What would be some ways, as I talk about being powerful with, right, so that they don't put themselves in this one-up position. So they're kind of showing up opposite to what you're saying about, I'm going to be submissive to my husband. And I'm like, no, I got some bossy girls that like super strong, kind of like potentially even some unhealthy feminism going on there. That I'm inviting them to, look at, but like, help me. What would be some good ways to, or even to our listeners, right? If we have a spouse that might identify, oh shoot, I'm wielding power over my husband at this point because he's looking at pornography, and now I'm putting myself in this one-up position. He owes me. I deserve to get what I want, how I want it, and I deserve to be entitled now because of all of the things that he's done to hurt me, and I'm now wielding this power over.
So that is
help me
pretty normal.
be equal. I know that is, and my
Given
daughters
this
are like already going
circumstance.
into it like that. So I'm like, how I want them to like, what are some ways to like allow myself to be equal or allow my spouse to be equal? Right. So now this is, I guess, general of like, hey man, if you're listening to this and you're
Yeah.
recognizing that you need to invite your wife to be an equal with you, here's some tips on how to do that.
Right.
And betrayed, as you're listening to this, hey, this is some ways in which you can allow your spouse to be equal, even despite the fact that he's betrayed.
So many thoughts running through my head, and I'm not sure I know all the right answers. And I will say I have a couple of daughters in that same position now, where I don't want any man telling me what to do.
Yeah.
However, with that said, when we're talking specifically about women who've been betrayed and they're in that crisis stage,
Yeah.
which may last decades, it may last a year, it may last 2 years, it may last decades. Shame is a big part of what keeps them in that crisis stage for a long time.
Okay.
But if they're in that stage, they may try to exert power over because they've learned they have no power. So I would say if they're in that kind of a stage, it's going to take time. It's going to take patience. It's going to take healing. Once they get through crisis and aftermath into that healing stage, they start to balance out the power struggle. But for those who want to get a jump on it and they don't want to wait for that, I love the analogy of the cross being, and my husband and I talk about this a lot, that the cross is powerful looking up with divinity, but then there's also that humanity aspect that goes the other way. And looking at the humanity, the fallen nature of all of us, that Christ is here to heal and to help us move toward divinity. And that doesn't happen for anybody I know easily or without a lot of suffering and trials and adversity that really truly refine us.
As you're talking about the correlation of crisis and shame, here at Unashamed Unafraid, we like talking about shame and how it impacts things.
Or the lack
Yeah.
thereof,
Or the lack
actually.
thereof,
We like talking about not having shame.
Yeah.
Letting shame go.
With this correlation between like this crisis stage will last a long time if you're staying in shame.
Yes. Yes, that's the one thing that I noticed that kept people from getting out. And that looks like hiding it,
Okay.
isolating, feeling like it's all of your fault
Okay.
as a woman,
Okay.
probably some blaming, not being able to get out of a just super triggered, super overreactive nervous system.
Okay.
Yeah, those are some of the things.
Is the crisis stage where they're like really angry?
Yes.
Okay.
Because their nervous system, like I said, is on fire.
Okay.
And actually, I found in my research it started before the discovery.
The
It
anger
started the crisis
The
stage
crisis
did.
stage did. Okay.
It started, almost all the women started saying, I felt like something just wasn't right. I felt like something was off.
Yeah.
And I'd question him about it and he'd lie.
Yeah.
This is for some of them. Now, I do have to say some of the women in my study knew about the pornography use or previous infidelities or whatever before they got married. And they were told, I've taken care of that. Don't worry. It's all okay. It's not going to be a problem. Once we're married, we can have sex as we want, much as we want. It's going to not be an issue.
Yeah. If you listen to, you're telling the story of like all of our episodes right now.
Okay. So what the women do is they start to relinquish some of their power at that point, which is why then they swing the other way and they want to take power over because they've relinquished to try to stabilize the relationship.
Got it.
Especially relinquishing sexually. They're like,
Okay.
he wants me to do things I don't want him to do. And in order to keep the marriage going, in order to stabilize, I'm going to do them. Not that I want to,
Got
not
it.
that I love him. There's
Okay.
not intimacy involved. And they may give up their college dreams. They may give up career dreams. They may even give up their religion for some women to stabilize the relationship. And all of these relinquishing of their religious power, their sexual power, their intellect, whatever it is, then they think that that it's an exchange for them, right? An exchange mindset. And when the exchange ended up being a farce,
Right.
then everything crumbles, and that's when they're like, I am grabbing onto any bit of power that I can.
Wow.
Mhm. Yeah, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so in that anger stage, like, because that's a hard stage.
Yeah.
Because at one point, like, that anger's valid, that's real, and at some point, like, unless you want to just live there for decades, like, moving through that's not always easy.
It's really hard, and it's complicated if you have a religious leader
Okay.
who really pays attention to the betrayer. That's probably, what do you guys call them on your podcast? To the person who
The addicted, or
the addicted,
the person who's
use
acting
addiction
out.
language.
Okay. We use it because everyone kind of identifies with that, even though we don't really believe in. It's like, no, it's like a compulsive behavior, but
yeah. In
But
research,
a lot of
they
people
don't
are
like
gonna
to
say
use the
it-
word addiction
yeah.
anymore.
Yeah, we don't.
Yeah.
We're not big fans of it here either, but
Yeah, but the women that I interviewed did use that quite often.
right,
So,
and that's why we use it, because it's like people are just kind of used to that being the term, even though we actually are like, it's not necessarily helpful.
so you've probably heard the analogy that a guy comes along in a truck and he hits the woman and she's laying there bleeding,
Right.
and they come and pick up the guy in the truck so he won't do it to other people and leave her there bleeding.
Right.
We hear that. But what is true is there are religious leaders who are fantastic at meeting with the women often, finding them resources, and helping make sure that they feel cared for just as much as the man.
That's such a big difference. Yeah.
Heidi, can you tell me what your opinion is on this? Because one thing I have noticed is a lot of times when we're dealing with these difficult topics, we try to make the religious leader the therapist, or someone who is doing more of a job in that role than they should be doing. They're just religious leaders. What do you recommend to people in order to solve that problem and not rely solely on, because right where you do have like, hey, he's just a representative who's trying to help you, access grace and heal, but he may not have all the knowledge and know how to, like, maybe not pick sides, or he may know more about addiction. And so that's why he's like, hey, I'm really helping the man who's struggling in addiction, but don't necessarily know how to help the woman. What do you recommend as far as resources so that women can stay out of that dynamic and take back power in their life?
That's a really good question. So we had in my study several different types of religious leaders. A lot were lay religious leaders. They didn't have specific training, but there were also those who did. And even those who did have like a religious counselor kind of a certification or degree, they still often did not know how to work with the women. And so for that reason, my opinion is that if you can find someone who has been CSAT trained or APSATs trained, those are APSATs is a certification for those working with the betrayed partner, and CSAT, Certified Sex Addiction Therapist, is the one that would work with the person who did the betraying. And there are probably other certifications as well. But those are the two biggest ones that I'm familiar with. Or
even though
someone
the narrative
who has,
like sexual addiction can sometimes not be helpful or be very harmful.
That's a good question. So that is a very good question, and I have some opinions about that
Yeah.
as well.
We do too.
Yeah.
And I really, at some point, want to develop my own way of working with them.
Yeah.
But I do work with a few, not a lot, because I have a lot of things going on, but I do work with a few people, and I have kind of my own opinions on how that should happen a little bit differently.
Yeah.
So maybe we can talk sometime.
Yeah, we should. Or have you back on and we'll hone on that topic alone.
Okay.
So sorry, I kind of hijacked the whole thing and kind of stuck us in the crisis stage. Would you take a minute and just kind of walk us through the rest, unless you got?
Well, no, I
Something
wanted to know, Heidi, can you just speak to women who, it sounds like you've made a very clear assertion that when you've been through something like this as a woman, we're talking about women, right? Woman or man, whoever's being betrayed, that there's a necessary element of healing. Otherwise, you stay stuck and in pain for a long time and don't take power back in your life. And I'd love to know what did you see that happened in the lives of these women that was helpful in that healing process? What took place there?
So before they even get to healing, it was helpful for women need women for healing.
Yes.
Okay. So they need someone who's gone through it, not from a point of, oh, honey, you just need to have more sex with your husband and everything will be fine. Not that kind, but a woman who can get down in the trenches and say, you know what? This stinks. It hurts.
Yeah.
And I could see it even before you told me.
Yeah.
I can see because I recognize it in myself as well. And so that's one thing for sure. But there's one other stage before we hit healing, and that's the aftermath stage, where maybe their nervous system's starting to calm down a little bit. They're not so angry, but they're hyper vigilant at trying to fix and control everything. They may put cameras up. They may be going through every phone record. They may be looking at every text. They may
So this is like the control phase.
Yes.
So a crisis phase is a really big kind of emotional dysregulation. And control phase is this next aftermath phase.
Right.
Okay.
But at the same time, they're really questioning. How did this happen to me? How did I not see it? Or I thought I saw it, but I was not understanding what was going on. So they're questioning, who is this person I'm married to?
Yes.
They're questioning their religion.
Yeah.
A lot of the women
they're questioning,
went through faith
do I even
crises.
have a sense of knowing what's real out there anymore? Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
Who am I?
Yes. Okay.
When we're talking about identity, I have no clue who I am. I thought I knew who I was. I want to go back there.
Right.
I want to, they keep trying to get back to that, who they were before. They want to keep going back to the Garden of Eden, to that creation state.
Yeah.
And eventually at the bottom of the stage, they hit rock bottom and they're just like, I can't control anything, God. I give it to you. That was probably most often. Some were just like acceptance phase, maybe a little bit less submitting to God, but they, after going over and over and over in their mind, who is God? What is my religion? And really pulling down everything they believed, submitting to God and saying, I can't do it. You do it. You help me. And that's a big part of where they start transitioning into healing.
Can you speak to what that looks like, Heidi? Can you go, like, when you say they submitted to God, right? That's like we say that a lot, and sometimes people take on meanings that aren't intended. What does it actually mean for a woman to like give that to God?
Or shoot a guy too.
Yeah.
Right. Like in their own struggle, in their own addiction or whatever too. Yeah.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I'm glad you brought that up, because this whole pattern is also
it applies
the
on
same
the other
thing
side, right?
It applies to both sides. I figured that out at the end.
Yeah.
So it looks different for women. And when I tell women about the aftermath stage, they're like, oh, that's me. I'm at rock bottom. but they aren't, because they're still trying to control things.
Yeah.
It means that I've been told by friends or family, this isn't such a big deal. Why are you freaking out about it? Or, like I said, it's your fault. You aren't having enough sex with your husband or whatever. They don't care what other people think anymore. They've tried to get help. Maybe the therapists or the clinicians that they went to were not trauma informed, were not able to understand their perspective, especially from a religious perspective. And they feel like they're powerless to do anything but to turn it over to him. One of my favorite stories of this was a woman who, she was Native American, and she left her husband. There'd been many betrayals, and she moved back into her grandfather's old abandoned home. He'd been dead on the his home was on the reservation in Arizona, and he'd been dead for some time. And she just went in there, and there was no running water, there was no electricity, and she just started tearing things out. And then as she started moving into that healing stage, just with a credit card she had to Home Depot, she completely rebuilt that house by herself. And what a great analogy that was, of getting rid of the gunk, getting rid of the pain, the suffering, and somewhere in that point finding strength to start taking control, not of anybody else, only of herself.
I'm imagining she did not stay married based off of what you described.
She didn't.
Okay.
You're right.
So to the woman who wants to stay married and their spouse is engaged in their own healing and recovery.
Great question. And that's my favorite kind of situation.
Yeah, same.
What I found is, if the spouse was willing to really work hard at their recovery, then, and at the same time, the woman was really working on her recovery, on her healing, then the marriages were totally transformed into something far better than they ever had back in the Garden of Eden.
Wow.
That they ever had back in that innocent stage. The women told me, well, I guess we're kind of lumping together healing and transformation here, but they found their own identity was, they said, I like myself better now. How can this be? I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, but I like myself better now, and my marriage is a whole new marriage. But that requires really intentional work in that healing. That means they finally started speaking up for themselves after they'd suppressed their voices for a long time. They started finding a clinician who worked well for them. They started making intentional boundaries instead of really chaotic and threatening or unhealthy and maladaptive boundaries. A big one is they started learning. If they learned almost about anything, they healed much more quickly. So if they went back to school, if they were learning a new skill, if they were, a lot of them learned about addiction, and they just started deep diving into that. And they reported that was helpful for them to see how the brain works. Starting to care for themselves. They'd very often spend a lot of time caring for everybody else, and at the expense of their own understanding who they were. And once they started caring for themselves, then they started seeing, oh, I have some things I need to change too. It's not just him.
Wow.
Yeah, which is powerful, because
That
now
was
you're
very
on
powerful.
equal footing.
Yeah.
Yes. So when I say the power starts leveling out during this healing stage, I am so serious. And
Right.
a lot of times it takes a lot on the I'm saying man because that's in my study what it was on the man's part, a lot of, yep, you're right. I did wrong things. I did bad things. I'm working really, really hard. And him gaining empathy for her and for her situation, and him, yeah, you're going to be doing more than she is in a lot of different areas for a while. You're going to recreate yourself. And as you do that, she starts often to respond.
Wow. So Heidi, if you could condense all of the big hitter information into just 1 or 2 minutes, just kind of, if I'm a woman or a man who's recovering from betrayal trauma right now, what are the things that I need to know and the steps that I need to follow in order to get myself where I want to be and out of where I don't want to be?
I would say find people you can trust, and it may take trying a few different people till you find the ones that are right for you, and people who have hope, that can give you hope, that aren't, this is my opinion, who don't bag on the spouse. That's, to me, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
To me, that my happiest interviews were those where the women were able to figure it out with their spouse. Now, if the husband is unwilling or maybe have some personality tendencies that keep them from taking responsibility, or just blames everything on the spouse or whatever, there are a number of different things, then that's one thing. But find somebody that can help support you, and find someone that for your husband that can do the same thing. Really take your own healing seriously, and have hope that through this process, transformation occurs. Transformation into something more beautiful than you ever thought it could be.
Tell me about what changed about people's or what did they experience about their higher power, God, Jesus? What changed from this stage to this, from the first stage to the end stage, or like, because it sounds like you were talking about Christian people, so I'm assuming you brought in their views of God or Christianity or Jesus through this process.
Yeah.
Just talk into that a little bit.
Oh, I wish I should have brought some quotes to read you. They're so beautiful. Just like,
we'll just praise Jesus here for a minute. Yeah.
Who is that person that I thought was Jesus?
Yeah.
Like, he's so much bigger and brighter and more amazing than what I ever thought. So I did talk about that they kind of deconstructed their religion, and then they built it up, sometimes changing religion, sometimes changing locations where they went, sometimes changing religious leaders, pastors, or whatever, but building it up again only as a scaffolding to support their relationship with Jesus Christ. So a lot of times they would take out things that were not as necessary because their spirituality, and when I say that, I mean their relationship with Jesus Christ became the most important. And I do have to say, they often reported seeing Christ all along the way. One woman, especially after in that crisis stage, one said she felt him snuggled up, or somebody she thought was him just snuggled up to her. And more than half of the women talked about being suicidal during that crisis stage.
Yeah.
And often they would hear voices or feel a presence of somebody saying, now's not the time. I'm here with you. Things like that. So a lot of them reported just people being put in their path that could be helpful to them. So their relationship with Christ through the entire thing was being strengthened day by day by day. Sometimes they were pretty mad for a little while during that aftermath period, but
Yeah.
then it strengthened even more. And they, I just wish you could have a whole meeting just hearing their praises of, especially the Christian women, their praises of Christ, and how, while they couldn't necessarily know that they could trust their husbands, they could trust God always. They could trust him. And if you look at that through attachment theory, that makes a lot of sense. Guy is imperfect, but there's a strengthening of that bond with Christ, knowing that that's who they could lean on and that's who they could trust. So regardless of whether the marriage works out or not, almost exclusively, it was a little bit less with the Jewish women, but almost exclusively the women came out feeling just more alive in Christ.
Wow.
Awesome.
Heidi, I'm sure there's a lot of people who want to know more about your work. How can they get in contact with you, and how can they access your resources?
That's a great question. So I have a website that's drheidihastings.com with no period after the DR.
Yeah.
And in there, I have tabs Marriage IQ, Betrayal IQ, and Newlywed IQ. So if you go to the Betrayal IQ tab, I have resources for podcasts that I've been on, but also resources for podcasts, books, music to help with the nervous system, meditation types of things. I have a lot of resources in there that will be helpful.
Awesome.
So, and then another resource, I have my husband and I back in May started the Marriage IQ podcast. And what we did is took my research on identity and how insight or self-awareness and intentionality and intimacy fold into either recreating a better, more healthy marriage, or if you don't have problems with betrayal and other things, just starting out on the right foot to put things into your marriage to increase all of those parts of you that can make for a scintillating marriage.
Awesome.
So we use a lot of research for that, and it was, again, a creation that came out of the research that I did, taking it and making it into a positive.
Wow.
So you can find that on any of the places that podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcast. You can link to it through marriageiq.com or through our Facebook or Instagram sites.
Fantastic. Well, we'll put the links on our show notes for sure. And
That'd be great.
Heidi, thanks for being on with us. Appreciate your thoughts. I think it's going to help a lot of people. Just so helpful to understand that process and what the spouse goes through when addiction is present and the stages that they have to go through in order to heal. If you're listening to our show today and you liked our content, feel free to leave us a 5-star review so we can spread this message to more people. Donate and become an outsider on unashamedunafraid.com. Follow us on social media at Unashamed Unafraid. And until next time, remember to be unashamed.